The holiday season. A time for festive cheer, family gatherings, and questionable Christmas movies. I'll be reviewing some pretty dodgy movies this month, so everyone, buckle up. While researching which films would be suitable to review around Christmas, I came across a movie I actually recognised. Disney's 1998 bomb, I'll Be Home for Christmas. I remember watching this once or twice when it aired on TV during my childhood. I think it was on Film 4 or something. Does anyone still watch that channel? I ended up stumbling across the film on a couple of worst Christmas movies lists. It was ranked number 18 out of 22 on the Rotten Tomatoes list of worst Christmas movies by Alex Vo. But does I'll Be Home for Christmas deserve more love? It is the time of giving after all. Let's find out. Without further ado, on with the review.
One selection box god. I'm the selection box god. All these other boys fraud. They just eat the one bar, but I eat them all. I'm the selection box god.
So, the film opens with some appropriate Disney-style opening credits, goofy animations and all. We're then introduced to our protagonist, I think, Jake, played by Jonathan Taylor Thomas, who is probably best known for voicing young Simba in the original Lion King, as well as playing Randy Taylor in Home Improvement. I question his role as the protagonist of the film, as he isn't exactly introduced in a likeable way. We first see him getting his homework, and backstage passes to a Dave Matthews show from a nerd named Ian that he finds trapped in his locker. Ian explains that it was Jake's rival, Eddie, that did this to him, and Jake naturally swears vengeance. While it's nice that he frees his supposed friend, it's not so nice that Jake doesn't do it until he gets what he wants from Ian. On top of this, Jake asks Ian to change his tickets from New York, where his father lives, to 2 tickets to Cabo San Lucas, as he wants to take his girlfriend on a trip over the Christmas holidays. Ian just agrees, and I'm like, have some self-respect, man! Say no, or demand he do something in return, like teach you how to play football or whatever non-nerd stock characters do in their spare time. Jake goes to visit his girlfriend, Allie, played by Jessica Biel, who I previously mentioned in my review of Planet 51, where she portrayed the love interest, Nira.
Sleeping. I can't sleep. I've got to study.
Allie tells Jake to get out given her need to study, but before he vacates her room, he impresses her with a makeshift snow machine, Ian shaking a box full of fake snow. As I was saying, this opening scene purely exists to demonstrate how selfish Jake is at the beginning of the story. However, Allie rejects Jake's idea to spend Christmas away from their families, and tries to encourage him to go home as well. We also learn that Jake is a new stepmother, Carolyn, which may hint at the real reason why he doesn't want to go home. It does make me feel a little bit bad for him, as some people do really struggle with family changes, especially if one of their parents had died. Eddie then shows up and has the audacity to hit on Allie in front of Jake. Total dick move, even if Jake is a bit twatty himself at this point. Thankfully, Allie rebuffs Eddie, and as he's distracted, he ends up crashing his new car into one of the parked ones in the parking lot. Karma's a bitch, buddy, and it had your name on it. Eddie is played by Adam Lavorgna, who also co-starred with Jessica Biel in the show Seventh Heaven. When his dad calls him about the ticket change, Jake tries to lie. However, Jake's dad doesn't fall for it, and in quite a poignant scene, both he and Carolyn try to convince Jake to come home and spend time with them as a family. Jake still refuses, but finally agrees when his dad promises to give him their 1957 Porsche. Okay, so let me get this straight. I understand that Jake is struggling to adjust to his new family life since his mother died, and his father has recently remarried. However, the fact that his dad has to bribe him to spend time with him makes him come across like a real scumbag. I know that's kind of the point of this type of story, but Jake's really going to have to do a lot to make up for all this so far. In the following scene, Jake stands around with a piece of mistletoe waiting for Allie like a total dweeb, but she refuses to kiss him. Even though he doesn't come across like the nicest guy here, that's rough, man. Anyways, he tells her that he's changed his mind about spending Christmas with his family, something she's very pleased about, and they make up. one of Jake's schemes goes wrong after promising to help some jocks cheat on their tests using pages, with Ian sending them the answers. Eddie intercepts this plan, locking Ian in his locker again and making Jake look bad. As a result, the jocks confront him along with Eddie at a Christmas party. I just feel so bad for Ian throughout this movie. He's taking the brunt of all of Jake's shortcomings.
Stand up! Stand up!
The group glues Jake to a Santa costume, and he ends up stranded in the desert, so he can't meet Allie the next morning. How exactly were those guys able to achieve this? I'm pretty sure this counts as kidnapping and assault, and if arrests aren't made by the end of this film, it was rigged. Of course, Eddie also takes this opportunity to offer Allie a ride home to New York. Jake tries to call his dad, but due to his history of lying and scheming, his dad simply doesn't believe his story. Considering everything, I can't really blame him. It does sound pretty ridiculous. Nevertheless, Jake uses his talent for deception to trick an old lady into thinking he needs to be home for Christmas to arrive in time for his father's non-existent triple bypass surgery.
The operation's on Christmas Eve, and now I won't be home until after the anesthesia wears off.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Unfortunately for our sanity, this lie actually works, and the nice old lady offers Jake a ride to Vegas with her family, as they're going to see Tom Jones perform there. Fortunately though, they throw Jake out of the car when he can't help but feel carsick after being surrounded by all the old lady nonsense. He also spots Allie and Eddie while on the side of the road, but he doesn't reach them in time due to a combination of traffic and Eddie speeding away. That night, Jake finds a sleigh prop to sleep in, and talks to the Santa mannequin before tossing it aside and tucking himself under a blanket. Not only is that pretty disrespectful, as it's not his property, but imagine how bizarre that exchange would look to a passerby. The following morning, it becomes even more apparent that Eddie really isn't any better than Jake.
Whoa, you're not so cute in the morning. I'm kind of glad nothing happened.
Yuck. After being woken up by a maintenance guy, Jake hitches a ride from a dodgy driver who almost runs him over while trying to pick up a tomato off the floor of his lorry. Eyes on the road, dude! Meanwhile, Eddie demands to know what Jake has that he doesn't, and the exchange surrounding Allie's response made me chuckle.
Not even the rain has such small hands? What a nerd!
So, this lorry driver, Nolan, played by Andrew Lauer, seems to be under the influence of something as he keeps calling Jake Santa and becomes outraged on Jake's behalf when he learns that the car passing them contains Allie.
Mrs. Claus stepping out on Santa, letting some other guy down the chimney?
Oh, Lord.
When he tries to help Jake catch up to Allie and Eddie, the police start tailing them as Nolan is speeding. When Nolan admits that cops make him nervous, Jake asks if he's carrying stolen goods, which Nolan reluctantly confesses is true. Jake then willingly confronts the officers, telling them that he was speeding because he's on his way to a hospital to deliver presents to sick children. Man, this kid is an evil mastermind. Are we supposed to root for him or what? This backfires, however, as the police insist on escorting Jake and Nolan to the hospital. They end up handing out the stolen goods to the children in a very unusual scene, with Nolan fighting a kid over a present. One child simply wants to go home for Christmas, which moves both the cop and Jake enough to try and call their families. Carolyn is the only one at home though, so Jake just blows her off. How mean! Nolan calls himself a changed man after this experience, vowing to return home for Christmas and abandoning Jake. Meanwhile, the police officer, Max, played by Sean O'Brien, asks Jake to help convince his estranged wife to rekindle their relationship, leading them to drive down to Nebraska together. While many characters in this movie are unlikable, at least Nolan and the cop genuinely try to make amends, clearly reflecting poorly on Jake. Jake and Max make a deal that if he successfully manages to get Max's wife, Marjorie, to return to him, he'll have to buy Jake a ticket to New York. Max agrees, and the pair head to Marjorie's workplace, a place called Turf and Turf? Marjorie refuses to accept Max's apologies through Jake, who uses a walkie-talkie to communicate with her. Apparently, Max kissed his ex-girlfriend while drunk at a bar one night, so Marjorie is definitely in the right here. Nevertheless, Max somehow manages to convince her to take him back when Jake helps him serenade her. I'd rather she had stayed strong, but I guess this is necessary for the plot since Jake is sadly the main character. Allie and Eddie spend the night in a Christmas-themed Bavarian village, where they share some friendly bonding moments. That is something at least. In a particularly ironic turn of events, Allie and Eddie walk under some mistletoe and kiss, which is broadcast on TV in front of Jake. He does kinda suck, but Jake is still your boyfriend, Allie. This scene highlights how much it hurts to be betrayed like that, especially after what just happened with Max and Marjorie. Jake fakes an organ transplant in Allie's name to convince the bus driver to take a detour to the Bavarian village, where he sneaks in to check the guest list and find out where Allie is. This works, but she just ends up minimizing that televised kiss with Eddie. Yeah, no, they're all as bad as each other. Jake's own blabbermouth leads Allie to discover the truth about the Porsche deal with his dad and the organ transplant lie. Things are looking really bad for Jake right now, as this scene represents the culmination of all the lies he's told throughout the film coming back to bite him. I can't really blame Allie for losing faith in him, despite everything that's happened. And just like that, he's left to make the rest of the trip back with Eddie. And surprisingly, or perhaps unsurprisingly, they end up getting along pretty well. I suppose it makes sense since they're pretty similar people when you get down to it. The green screen in this scene is painfully obvious though, I can't lie. With that being said, Eddie dumped Jake on the side of the road in Wisconsin, as he can't do that many nice things for someone. Despite this, I still view Jake as the ultimate villain in this film though. Who lies about sick children and organ transplants? In hopes of winning prize money for a plane ticket home, Jake enters a 5-kilometer Santa race. He unknowingly beats the mayor, but after learning that the mayor usually donates the winnings to the needy, Jake decides to do the same. Meanwhile, Jake's little sister tries to buy him a plane ticket home, but he can't board the plane without identification. Jake resorts to stowing away in the cargo bay alongside the dogs, sneaking out while the boarding staff are distracted. You can really feel that disappointed parent look. You hate to see it. In a desperate move, Jake steals a sleigh and intentionally misses the Porsche deadline after reuniting with Allie. This all feels very cheap and rushed, but I'll discuss that in more detail later. Jake's family is ecstatic to see him, but honestly, that Santa suit must reek. His dad still offers him the Porsche, but Jake says he would rather add refinements to it and attempts to reach out to Carolyn. The film concludes with the family joining a Christmas parade, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays by NSYNC plays over the end credits. Did Ian ever manage to make his way out of that locker? So, where to begin with this movie? It's certainly not good, that's for sure. The first issue that comes to mind is simply how cheesy and predictable it is. I've seen a fair few Christmas family comedy films in my time, so I know that there are bound to be a few tropes that come with them, especially those from this era. For instance, the character, or characters, usually start off the story being quite flawed, but go through some kind of character growth during the course of the film, emerging as a better person on the other side. How does Jake compare to this? Well, he spends the majority of the film lying through his teeth, with the lies escalating in severity. His final lie in the film involves pretending that his girlfriend is a child in need of an organ transplant. That's downright evil if you ask me. On top of that, Jake breaks into wherever Allie is staying and then steals a sleigh to get back home. Just because he doesn't end up pocketing that prize money and tries to ingratiate himself with his parents doesn't absolve everything else he's done earlier in the film. He doesn't actually learn anything. He already knew that lying, especially to people you're supposed to care about, is wrong. He just didn't care. The fact that the redemption arc occurs in the last 20 minutes of the film makes it seem really rushed too. I think this would work better if Allie had her outburst earlier in the film, and Jake spent the main portion of the film learning how to not be deceptive and making the right decisions. That would actually display substantial character growth, not whatever half-assed attempt we got here. I also think we could just skip over the scene where Ellie kisses Eddie, as she could just get closer to him in a genuine platonic way instead, which Jake would probably be upset about anyway. On the contrary, Eddie does actually have repercussions for his actions throughout the film. After abandoning Jake in Wisconsin, he inadvertently insults some police officers, leading to his arrest. On the way to the station, he spots Jake in the street, who, understandably, waves at him smugly instead of offering help. I'll Be Home for Christmas seems to have quite a spiteful tone overall, which doesn't really feel fitting for a family Christmas film from Disney. But there you go. I don't seem to be the only one who thinks this, with one Reddit user writing that it becomes exhausting keeping track of all the people Jake is rude to or cons through his trek home, and that the writers only created an even bigger jackass in the Eddie character so that the audience would have someone to root against, despite the fact that they themselves say they like the film. Roger Ebert gave the film 1 out of 5 stars, stating that Jonathan Taylor Thomas's easy grin seems to weary a little by the later stretches of the film. It's just a really weird route to go down with the character. There was no need to make his deception so extreme. In the end, do I think that I'll Be Home for Christmas is the worst Christmas film of all time? No, not even close, and I'll be discussing more suitable candidates for that title in the coming weeks. However, I believe the message about realising what's truly important in life is lost when the protagonist doesn't undergo any meaningful journey by the end of the film. With that being said, I do understand the appeal of this film, as it was quite nostalgic for me. If you're looking for a goofy film to whack on during the holidays, this may be the one for you. However, if you want something with a more wholesome execution, I would recommend looking elsewhere. Well, that's all for this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching.
I'm the selection box god. All these other boys fraud. They just eat the one bar, but I eat them all. I'm the selection box god. All these other boys fraud. They just eat the one bar, but I eat them all. I'm the selection box god. All these other boys fraud. They just eat the one bar.